we're talking now about China-Israel relations in a shifting Middle East, and I think that's a sort of an understatement to describe this as shifting Middle East. This has been, as I mentioned earlier, 601 days into the war, and which is still remaking the Middle East to a large extent. And we started off this war at a problematic position when it comes to China-Israel relations. It has reached one of its lowest points, I think, since the establishment of China-Israel diplomatic relations back in 1992. However, I think that both sides at this stage are trying to address this relationship and restore this relationship. And I have to say, to his credit, I'm not sure if this is helpful for Professor Van Hongda. His approach from the outset was different, at least from I think a bit different from the official Chinese line. And I remember something that he wrote. This is not something he said, it's something he wrote. And I quote from memory, or paraphrase, that you can still denounce or condemn what happened on October 7 and continue to support the Palestinian cause. But we are here now also to discuss broader issues in the Middle East and the Chinese perspective, be it from the nuclear file, and nuclear energy issues, be it Iran, be it the Palestinian issue. And to this end, we brought together a broad range of speakers. To my far left, Dr. Levite, who's a senior fellow with the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace and a former Deputy National Security Advisor of Israel. To his right, I'm not sure if both of them like that sort of a definition, but whatever. Mr. Nitzan Horowitz, former Minister of Health, and he served on the Security Cabinet of the Bennett-Lapid government. He chaired the Meretz party then. In the middle, need no introduction, but nonetheless, Ms. Carice Witte, my master and executive director of Signal Group. And as I mentioned, Professor Van Hongda from Shanghai International Studies University. We're very happy that he's made it. And online, I think, Adam, is he online? The Dr. Liao from Beijing, is he online? Apparently not. So I hope he will rejoin, because he was online at one stage. But I understand that Professor Fan has a few opening remarks. So please, since you're the guest from afar, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be here with you. I have visited Ariel for several times, including a year at Tel Aviv University. I'm grateful to Signal for bringing me back again. China and Israel are indeed in urgent need for more exchange. What I would like to do next is share some of my understanding, my personal understandings on the China-Israel relationship. To be frank, I became quite concerned about the China-Israel relations after the outbreak of Gaza war in 2021. At that time, in order to explore a better strategy for China to deal with the Palestinian-Israeli conflicts, I published a series of articles rethinking the Gaza-Israel war and the Palestinian issues. I remember that an Israeli friend translated one of my articles into English. In my view, the Palestinian issue has long been one of the core factors shaping China's attitude toward Israel over the past few decades. After the October 7 attack, my first reaction was to worry about further damage to China-Israel relations. Unfortunately, subsequent development confirmed that my concerns were not unfounded. The ongoing impact of October 7 attack had been profound. Let us focus on the damage caused to China-Israel relations as a result. Do these two countries have fundamental conflicts of interest? I believe no one can give positive answers to this question. When I was a visiting professor at the Tel Aviv University a decade ago, I often heard Israeli friends say, with China, the relations with China would be the country's most important relationship in the future. So although China-Israel relations are currently face some troubles, I'm not pessimistic about the future. But it can't ignore that the third-party factors often affect the China-Israel relations. This is an issue that both countries must take seriously if they really want to have a healthy bilateral relationship. China and Israel should work hard to avoid letting third parties become obstacles to their relations. Israel often expresses concerns about the deepening China-Iran relationship. I have also seen reports of some Israelis disliking or even opposing the ongoing U.S.-Iran negotiations. In my view, it is more important for Israel to improve relations with Tehran rather than destroy the Islamic Republic. I am convinced that if Tehran improves its relations with the United States, there is a great possibility for Israel and Iran relations to improve as well, which would be beneficial for Israel. A peaceful and stable Middle East is more beneficial for China. Such a Middle East is also good for regional countries, including Israel. Israel has no reason to worry about China's motives in the region because China's diplomacy in the Middle East is not about creating conflicts, but about promoting development and peace. While seeking economic opportunities, I believe this aligns with what Israel also desires. Let's go back to October 7 attack. It is indeed a disaster that Israel and the Jewish people should never forget. I have noticed many Israelis have been reflecting on why it happened. The international community remains deeply divided in its views on ongoing Gaza war. I finished a year of living in the United States last October and witnessed firsthand the social divisions caused by the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in the United States. Regarding China's response to the October 7 attacks, there have certainly been some statements from China that Israel finds unfavorable. But I hope Israeli friends can take note that both Chinese scholars and the public widely criticize and even condemn the Hamas attack. The Chinese government has also been opposed to violence. Indeed, there are quite a number of Chinese people who view the October 7 attack as an act of terrorism. I'm pleased to say that both Israel and China are working hard to promote the positive development of bilateral relations, including signals consistent efforts. This is exactly what the two countries should do. So despite the difficulties I face, I have come here to engage an open and honest dialogue with you all for the sake of better future of China-Israel relations. I stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Fan. I wanted to say, before I turn to Carice, I want to acknowledge and welcome to the discussion Professor Dr. Liao in Beijing. I hope you can hear us. We are sorry that you were unable in the last minute to join us. Do you hear us well? Yes. All right, wonderful. So I will turn to you in a moment. Carice, you heard Professor Van Hongda, and I think you hosted him a decade ago, if I'm not mistaken. More than a day, yeah. She doesn't forget anything. I can say that. Do you concur with Professor Fan's, how would I say, characterization of Israel-China relations since 2021? He pointed to the 2021 as a turning point, but do you concur?
Okay, first of all, I think you said that the Chinese government condemned Hamas. It didn't. The first time we heard a condemnation was from your ambassador, your current ambassador to Israel, His Excellency Ambassador Xiao, who did publicly on television a couple of weeks ago. I do agree that May 2021 was a watershed for China-Israel relations because that was when China held the Security Council presidency at the UN and raised votes to compel Israel to end a war that was very dangerous at a time that was very dangerous. And when the US vetoed that vote, which is one of the reasons, by the way, we have this close relationship with the United States, is that they are there for us when dangerous things are suggested in the United Nations and the US prevents them from happening. The Chinese response was that the US was on the wrong side of morality. That was a watershed for, in my understanding, and for the understanding of Signal Group. And I also don't fully agree that the Palestinian factor has been a driving force in the relationship or a guiding force in the relationship all the decades, because from 2010 until very recently, the Palestinian issue was bifurcated. Yes, we support the Palestinians, but we're also very friendly with the Israelis. And they said the Palestinians are our brothers and the Israelis are our friends. And business was done, a lot of business. And the Palestinian situation was not resolved, and it didn't really make progress, but it didn't bother China. It was okay for China to have good relations with Israel and with the Palestinian Authority. And I would say that that's because really what drives the relationship is interests. And we can take it back to China having joined the Arab boycott back in the 50s, especially after the Bandung Conference in 1955, and didn't have anything to do with Israel until it was expedient and under the table through Saul Eisenberg, an international businessman, traded and sold Israeli defense equipment to China. And we can jump to the present, where China's interests in Israel were for water and agriculture technology. And that lasted until China became independent, or at least decided that it could manage without Israel's water technology. But then it became defense and intelligence. From the 90s until 2000 and 2004, when the United States caused Israel to cancel the Harpy and Falcon deals. But until that point, we had intelligence and defense sharing. So again, that interest came to an end. But then, in 2010, innovation. China decided to become the world's innovators, and Israel was a supplier not only of innovation, but of learning to innovate. They purchased the Technion in order to help them move forward in that goal. But then they became good at innovating and changed some of the foreign FDI, foreign direct investment rules, and so that became less important. And little by little, the major things that were causing China to be interested in Israel were coming to an end. Infrastructure was another area where there was a big interest by China to work in an OECD country, learn how to do major infrastructure deals and build with all of those rules and regulations. And then that ended. So now we're at a point where, and especially after October 7, when China no longer saw Israel as a regional power, there was not really an interest in being friends with Israel. There was no added value to it. The opposite. It was valuable to China to, be on the other side of what the U.S. stance. So if the U.S. was supporting Israel, China was not supporting Israel. And therefore, I would say that to a large extent, we can understand that the relationship that China has with Israel has been driven by its interests, and as its interests have evolved, so has the relationship.
Thank you, Carice. But Nitzan, I have to turn to you because I listened carefully to Professor Fanas, you did probably, and he spoke about a relationship between Iran and Israel, which China would gladly facilitate, and about trying to move ahead with the Israeli-Palestinian issue. What's wrong with that? Isn't that an idea that the time has come?
Well, I wish we could have a regional deal. You know, it's being discussed. Of course, we are in the middle of the war. But let me first complete Carice's remarks regarding the Israel-China, bilateral relations. You know, I monitored the relations between the two countries in the last year and a half since the October 7th attack. And it seems to me that there was like a pendulum movement, תנועת מטוטלת, okay? Like there was a change. As Carice mentioned correctly, right after the October 7th attack and the beginning of the war, China was quite hostile towards Israel, also in official remarks, but also very bluntly on the Chinese social media, social networks. It was very, very offensive towards Israel. But nevertheless, I think even at that time, China maintained its formal relations with Israel without any substantial change. There was a change of the tone and also a change in economic approach, okay? But then, a few months later, I think it began to change. And I think the change in the Chinese relations with Israel came at the end of last year, when Israel had some very remarkable military success in Lebanon, in Syria, vis-a-vis Iran. And then China, I think, realized that Israel is still a very strong factor in the Middle East, and so it should maintain good relations or improved relations with Israel. And so we saw a phone call between the Chinese foreign minister and the Israeli foreign minister. It was then Israel Katz, and they had a phone call. And then there was a meeting between the Chinese foreign minister and the Israeli foreign minister, Gideon Saar,
Yes,
the new one.
We have a tradition now of replacing them often.
Okay, in the Munich conference. And so this was a very sort of interesting meeting, because I would quote, the official transcript by the Chinese government was that China is ready to resume exchanges in all aspects as soon as possible, as the situation eases, of course, so as to promote the sustainable development of the innovative, comprehensive partnership between the two countries. Okay. And then the Israeli foreign minister said that Israel strongly supports the one China policy. Okay, so that was an interesting thing. By the way, we have here Professor Hongda, and so I saw your article on October, I think, and you mentioned I think the weakness of Iran and the problems of the Iranian regime, and I think it emphasized the importance, nevertheless, of Israel in China's eyes, so that Israel is still a strong, powerful military power in the region, and so China should try to maintain good relations, although, you know, the war is still going on, the Palestinian problem, the traditional Chinese position towards a two-state solution, etc., etc. So I think now maybe now, after a year and a half of some upheavals and crisis and drama, maybe we're again on a more steady track between our two countries, maybe.
But Eli, if I may, there is a broader agenda between Israel and China, or should be a broader agenda when it comes to Middle East. Would you be so kind to elaborate?
Well, I'm perfectly willing to elaborate, but let me preface this by saying, besides thanks to Signal for putting forward this panel, is that I'm not an expert on Israeli-Chinese relations. I work with the Chinese on other issues. I work on security issues in the Middle East, but I'm not an expert on Israeli-Chinese relations. Having said that, looking from my perspective at both the shifting Middle East and the potential for Chinese-Israeli relations to address both the opportunities and the risks that are coming about, I think there are at least 4 areas that I identify where China and China and Israel could collaborate. And I'm saying this bearing in mind that those are areas that would not be significantly hampered by the big US shadow hanging over the relationship, or even some of the domestic issues that are holding back Israel from doing certain things or China doing certain things in the bilateral relationship. So I want to talk about 4 areas: nuclear energy, nuclear proliferation, freedom of navigation, and threat of terrorism and terrorist armies. So let me tackle those very, very quickly, Tommy. So global warming, growing populations, and more energy-intensive industries and requirements, both because of the populations and the technologies that are necessary and so on, are driving a lot of states in the Middle East towards nuclear power. We see this in Turkey, in UAE, in Egypt, and so on. Saudi Arabia wants to go next, and so on. Others are interested, Jordan being a case in point, and so on. I think China and Israel share an interest that this development of peaceful nuclear energy in the Middle East proceed uneventfully. Because China is building a lot of nuclear energy for domestic purposes, wants to export some, and I fundamentally believe that they're making sure that the standards are not compromised, and that nuclear energy does provide solid energy safely, security, from a safety and security point of view, is an interest that both countries share. We don't want accidents and incidents in the Middle East. We don't want them in China or anywhere else in the world. Issue one. Issue two, nuclear proliferation. So the Middle East has long had countries expressing interest in nuclear weapons. Libya, Syria, Iraq, and of course we've already touched repeatedly on the Iran issue. The Iran issue is much bigger than the Iran issue because Egypt, Turkey, and Saudi Arabia have all expressed interest in going for nuclear weapons if Iran does. The potential spillover from Asia to the Middle East and from the Middle East to Asia on nuclear weapons is palpable. You have both Pakistan and North Korea that have provided nuclear weapons relevant technology to the Middle East. And there is the spiral that could go back if things go badly. Here, for example, South Korea is looking at Iran as a threshold state and how it's being treated. I think China and Israel stand to benefit if they collaborate on how does one deal with the nuclear proliferation issue in the Middle East and beyond. So that's area number two. Issue number three. Red Sea, Gulf of Oman, Straits of Hormuz are key arteries of global trade. There have been a lot of disruptions to these. Some of them have come from Iran in the form of intelligence, mining, targeting, capturing, whatever, and so on. Some have come from Somali pirates, and so on. Some have come from Houthis that are supported by Iran, and to some extent with Russia, and so on. Israel and China stand a great deal to benefit from freedom of navigation in the Red Sea. It's not a coincidence that China established a base in Djibouti. Let's face it. China has been taking part, albeit separately, in the anti-piracy operation off the Somali coast. So all I'm saying is I think that given that our interests are now more profound in the Red Sea maritime security, as is China's, I think, and those now stretch beyond the Red Sea, also to the Gulf of Oman, I think there is a significant common interest there. So that's area three. And area four, we've been talking about Gaza as Gaza. But I think we're dealing here with a much bigger phenomena, which we see not just in Gaza with the Houthis. We see terrorist armies that are taking advantage of advanced technologies to be able to produce significant domestic and international security threats. I think it's in the acute, and some of them are drawing on dual-use technologies which are cheap, and some of them even originate in China. I'm not saying this as a criticism. I'm saying here is an opportunity for the two nations to collaborate on how do we deal with the terrorism and terrorist armies, security threats that are being posed by these small forces, because what's happening here in the Middle East is also a source of inspiration, including to parties that operate within China and so on. So my final thought here is, and to wrap up, Tommy, is to say the following. I think there hasn't been a lot of optimism here about China and Israel collaborating in light of developments that have been portrayed here and so on. But I do think the potential is there. I don't think the U.S. would stand in the way, and I sure hope we go in that direction. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eli. Dr. Liao, are we heading in the direction that Dr. Levite just prescribed? because others would say that China's deep relations with Iran should be of concern to Israel. How do you see this? And if I may, just 1 second, Dr. Liao, I want to welcome His Excellency, the Ambassador of China to us, and he will come on stage after our session. So, Dr. Liao, back to you in Beijing. Yes, we.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I thank you for having me. Firstly, I want to say I'm fully agree with what Dr. Ariel said about we need less criticism and more cooperation between China and Israel. As the first point I want to say, and then return to the panel. And I know there are three guiding questions. Yeah, I'm reading it.
Yes.
I would like to reply the first one and the third one. Yeah.
Go ahead.
The first one is about what are the prospects and limits of the relation to reset. And first of all, I want to clarify that the current China and Israel relationship is not about to be reset. Yeah, because reset means that there has been a significant stagnation or regression in the China-Israel relationship. However, in my opinion, the China-Israel relation has been ongoing, although we have different views on some certain issues. In fact, this difference have existed for a long time and could not be paused or resolved before. And it's becoming more apparent after October 7, 2023. So what are these obstacles or difference between us? I think it's mainly due to American factor and the Palestine issue. We talked that with Greece before. I think the US factor probably is the biggest obstacle to further deepening and expanding China-Israel relations, which can be said to be the ceiling and prevents China-Israel relations from further improving. It leads to cooperation between the two countries only in limited areas, as Chris said, water or culture or innovation. This situation has become even more apparent after the outbreak of October 7, 2023. Because after that, almost the whole world has seen how special, the relationship between the United States and Israel is. And if the factor of the USA is only related to the interests of China and Israel, I think then the Palestinian issue involves different principled positions of the two countries. We can say the former one is acceptable, but the latter one is very difficult to change because it's related to principle of our two countries. And from this perspective, the biggest factor limiting the further improvement and development of China-Israel relations, how to say, is actually Israel itself. I will say very, very frankly, because I wonder, would you change your relationship with the United States? Would you change your stance on Palestine? I think the answer is very obvious. And evidenced by Israel's recent ground attacks in the Gaza Strip. Is the first point I want to say. And the second point, on the issue of the relations between our two countries, I would like to clarify who would prefer to see changes. Actually, it comes more from Israel than China. It's probably a little different from what you said. You know, in the invitation letter I received, there is a passage that reads, with Israel's intelligence and operational success rewriting the regional narrative from Lebanon, Iran, onto Syria and Gaza, China has been recalibrating its posture in the Middle East and policy towards Israel. The expression of this sentence is very interesting. Simply put, I want to say it overestimates Israel and underestimates China. Similarly, the third guiding question is also interesting. Let me read that can Israel shape Chinese behavior through economic or diplomatic engagement? I want to say China is not the USA. There is no Jewish lobbying group, and there are no religious or cultural connections. Shape, you know, is a big word, showing a strong sense of confidence. You can say you try to influence, try to persuade, try to communicate. I think these kinds of words are possible. But when it comes to shaping, it's too difficult. In fact, I think I cannot be shaped myself, even though I have been to Israel, even though I have received many visits from Israeli scholars and delegations. Is the third point, is the second point. And finally, what I want to say is that we should pay more attention to the positive and good aspects. Just as Dr. Ariel said, focus more on cooperation, less on criticism, because this kind of challenge and obstacles are very difficult to be resolved. For example, despite the influence of the USA, we have been working hard to expand our cooperation areas and try to find new ways of cooperation. Despite having different positions on the Palestinian issue, China has always viewed the problem and formulated policies based on the right and wrong of the matter, rather than being biased. And more importantly, the Chinese people have not have or developed a sense of anti-Semitism or erupt in protests or demonstrations as a result. And comparing to the United States and many other European countries recently. So I would like to say, or I would like to ask, what do you expect more from China? I want to stop here.
Thank you very much for those candid remarks, because I think it's an important contribution to this discussion. because it's important here to be straightforward, I think. Dr. Hongda, so where do we go from here? How do we establish a dialogue?
Today's dialogue.
Today is a dialogue, it's true.
Frankly, I enjoy today's dialogue. Just as I said a moment ago, now there is indeed Israel and China. We need to have more exchange. But actually, I have a question. I have a question for Israeli friend. Because of ongoing Gaza war, many countries criticize Israel. I want to know why China has almost been the only target Israel criticized.
No, you see, that's should I answer that? Can I answer that? No, see, because it's first of all, I have to say two things, and I'm sure that Carice will add a few others. But I think the number one reason for the Israeli contestation regarding this issue was the fact that until two and a half weeks ago, no official Chinese government spokesperson or official said explicitly, directly, and not in vague terms, that China condemns what happened on October 7. I think that is the main reason for whatever came after. Not the only one, but the main one. And I see that Carice wants to add to that. So I'll let her.
Very simple. With great power comes great responsibility. You're a great power. You have a responsibility. So I'm not sure that China was the only one that Israel was concerned about with respect to criticizing Israel over the war. However, first of all, Signal Group is a China-oriented organization, so we're going to be thinking about China. But on the wider picture, China is a rising superpower, and you are a huge and quite amazing great power, and therefore, when someone with such a huge footprint, economically, diplomatically, globally, you have friends all over the world. We know, you tell us all the time. You're friends with everyone in the region. So how does your friendship express itself and your power express itself? It does not acknowledge the reality of October 7th. And as you had written, you can do both. You can support the Palestinians and acknowledge the horrors of October 7th.
And I want to ask, and I want to bring you, Nitzan, back into this discussion, because you have visited China immediately in the aftermath of October 7, together with Carice and Signal Group, and then last year again, and you're sitting here today. Do you think something is changing? And by the way, all right, from an Israeli perspective, sorry for this, should we kiss and forget and make up and just what happened, or?
Well, let me tell my Chinese friend here. You know, this is a conference about China, so we're dealing with the Chinese reaction and the relations between Israel and China. But regarding the war and the situation in the Middle East, well, many countries criticize Israel, and Israel has issues with many countries, so China is not the only one. Not at all. Not at all. I think, as Tommy and Carice mentioned, let me just explain. that, on October 7th, Israel was attacked in a very vicious way. And even countries that are not in excellent relations with Israel condemned this attack. And China didn't say anything and talked about the two sides. And I'm talking about even before Israel started the war in Gaza, just after the October 7th attack, which was very traumatic for Israelis. So for us, we have here the Israeli ambassador to China, who witnessed this firsthand, this very difficult attitude that we felt. So, this was something that we mentioned. And Tommy, you remember when during the last year conference, Israel, I talked about some steps.
I didn't want to mention it, actually, yes.
Yeah, I talked about some steps that Israel was considering towards China. For instance, strengthening the relations with Taiwan, for instance, stuff like that. But I think we are beyond that. We are beyond it. I think so. I think China emphasized in a recent month its desire to maintain good relations with Israel. That is an important statement by China. We appreciate it. We understand it. And I think Israel also would like to maintain and to improve relations with China. I think this is, and I'm not a representative of the government, believe me, but I think this is a true sort of image of Israel's position. And so maybe, and I think to end the war, it's a primary condition. Once the war is ended, is ended in Gaza, maybe with a ceasefire, with an agreement, with something, then I believe that the road will be open again to renew relations in each and every aspect with China. Okay, that's my assessment. Okay, and to answer your question before about Iran, I heard you. Look, the thing is that between the Israeli people and the Iranian people, there is no animosity. The problem is within the leadership, okay? The current Iranian leadership declared many times that it would like to see Israel erased off the map, okay? Destroying Israel. Israel never said that it would like to destroy Iran. Not at all, never. So our conflict is with the Islamic Republic's leadership, not with the Iranian people, okay? And so I believe that once the Iranian leadership attitudes would change, okay, and they would stop with this erasing Israel and destroying Israel and eliminating Israel, then I believe, again, that the road would be open again for good relations, as we had before the Islamic Revolution, and of course you know about it.
Eli, you outlined an agenda. Do you think we can advance it seriously? Do you think we can?
Well, I fundamentally believe that we can.
Because I have to stress this point here. You mentioned this in briefing, and but I hope you won't, I'm not overstepping, but you have a wealth of experience in engaging with China on nothing to do with Israel's issues. Do you think there is openness on the Chinese side? And would this benefit Israel's national security?
You're raising more than one question. Let me try and deal with those. Let me try and deal with those kind of very succinctly. I see we're operating under the pressure of time, and I'm dying to hear the ambassador here and hear his views. So I'll say the following. First of all, I'm not criticizing China. I am only observing that I think there were missed opportunities. When President Macron and President Biden and the British Prime Minister all showed up here, there was an opportunity for China that China missed. And I'm not saying this because of sympathy for Israel, but I think China does not believe in the use of violence. China likes stability. China does not want to encourage extreme terrorism, and China wants to promote and encourage political settlement, including on the Palestinians, but not exclusively on the Palestinians. That's the Chinese policy broadly defined. By the way, between us, I also think that you missed an opportunity initially on Ukraine. But I think ultimately China made a huge difference when President Xi told President Putin, don't even think about using nuclear weapons. So China, I think, missed some opportunities. I'm not saying this is a criticism. China has its own interests. But I think there was a missing of opportunities to actually speak out on the values that China espouses, not on the values that Eli Levite espouses. Now I come to all of the 4 areas that I mentioned, I think are first and foremost Chinese interests. China is interested in against terrorism and use of violence. China is interested in freedom of navigation. China is interested in nuclear energy, and China is very strong supportive of nuclear non-proliferation. I've been working on some of those issues with my Chinese counterparts, and have found that dialogue, not as an Israeli, mind you, not that I conceal my Israeli identity, extremely, extremely constructive, including on very delicate issues. I won't go into any specifics here in this forum. So I think the potential is there. I think the Chinese expertise is there. I think the Chinese interest to promote it is there. And I would say one more thing. Given how much trouble the Israeli bureaucracy and political leadership is involved in at the moment, not just the war, other issues, I think a lot depends on Chinese initiative. If China expressed interest in saying, okay, you know, the Red Sea security is an issue of interest to China. How can we collaborate? Can we exchange information on what are the source of threats? Can we discuss it and so on? What type of proliferation, what type of action follows? You can debate later. There is going to be a lot of nuclear power in the Middle East. How do we make sure that it's safe and secure? What role would Israel welcome in China promoting a diplomatic solution to the Iranian nuclear program? I think it's in Chinese interest as much as it is in Israel. I'm talking about a diplomatic one, not a military one, a diplomatic one. By the way, I was involved in dealing with the North Korean issue. China was extremely constructive in its attitude. So, but I'm saying to your question, I think China needs to take the lead, not because you're just a superpower, but because of the complications here in terms of the government coherence.
We are running out of time, as Carice warned us, but I want to turn back to Dr. Liao. You listened carefully. I saw you listening very carefully to what Dr. Levite just said. What do you think about Chinese initiative to that end? Dr. Liao?
Yes?
What do you think about what Dr. Levite just said?
Yeah, sure, I agree with him.
Oh?
You know, I'm listening to him very, very carefully. And I want to say very frankly, I like this guy very much. He knows China very well. And I'd like to hear more from him. And I would like to invite you to come to China.
All right.
No other things. Would agree with him.
All right. Well, Eddie, I think, now the ball is in your court. Yes. I think that, I think that's all you need to say, right? No, to be clear, I think you've been working on these issues you elaborated on for the past, 8 years at least, as I can remember. But I think it's time to wrap up. Just if somebody wants to add a sentence, I know that Carice said that she wants to add a word, so I don't want to get... No.
I just want to say that on anti-terror, Ellie, We were talking to the Chinese, think tanks before COVID about this common interest that we share against terrorism. And there were some small things done between Israel and China, but it was very limited. And in spite of the fact that we shared that interest, and sharing regional security, many interests that we share, and just found that because of China's size and versus Israel's size, China's interests and its goals versus Israel's interests and goals, it's very difficult, and I don't want to be, the glass half empty person, because I am very optimistic in general, but I think we have to be aware that as much as these are China's interests, you're absolutely right, and they're Israel's interests, there are other overriding interests that sometimes interfere. And I think that Professor Liao noted one of them. He mentioned the United States. And so we need, China's interest with respect to the United States trumps everything, no pun intended.
Two short remarks. First of all, thank you, Carice, for organizing all that. Professor Fan, you may think that this is a common event, but this is one of a kind in Israel. There are no such events about Israeli-China relations at all. In Israel, it's only thanks to Carice and Signal that this thing is happening, and there are guests from all over the world and from China, of course. So thank you, very important. And second, and this is related, unfortunately, Israel does not have a long-term policy vis-à-vis China. That's the truth. The government is not discussing that. Really, a little bit among, within the foreign ministry, but there is no policy. It's not mesudar. It's not organized, and it's a big mess. So, unlike your country where you have like long-term plans and you have big policy projects, Israel is not like that. And so I wish, and I know that this is a Carice's goal, that our country as well would develop an organized, well-structured policy towards China, where we can take everything into considerations. We can use the expertise of Carice, Signal, of other experts, and we have good, really excellent minds in Israel, and I call upon the government of Israel to use it and to develop a long-term policy towards China. Yeah.
I defer to Nitzan, but here's where my skepticism comes in. I don't think there's going to be a new Israeli policy toward China in the next year or year and a half, for many reasons, including the American one, but it's not exclusively. The American one is the issues and so on. I mean, clearly some of the situation that we're describing is Israeli fault, not just Chinese fault. Let's face it. But I would say the following. When my last visit to China, which was in December, my Chinese counterpart said to me, and I have to be very careful in how I frame it, because we said we don't quote people and whatever.
Yes.
They said, look, if you expect breakthroughs between the US and Chinese relations on the official level, every time there will be a thaw, something will happen that will kill it. Because of domestic developments here, domestic developments here, and so on. One has to find quiet channels of communication and ad hoc issues of collaboration. I fundamentally believe that that's what we need to do. I'm not even under this rubric of anti-terrorism, I think there are specific issues, right? Like, say, aviation security, maritime security, certain dual-use technologies of concern. We can talk about specifics. I fundamentally believe that we need to be able to facilitate that, and clearly some of the formal institutions ought to support this, but not be in the lead.
Well,
brief.
one sentence, because now we are risking overextending our hospitality. Yes, a sentence.
Brief conclusions. Yes, although there are some troubles, I believe China and Israel will have a better tomorrow. Relations have a better tomorrow because the two countries have not fundamental conflict of interest. This is the reason support my opinions.
Well, I think it was worthwhile just to hear that. We hope, Dr. Liao, that next year and next time you'll be able to join us in person, physically, here. I want to thank the panelists, and without further ado, it's back to Carice. Thank you all.